For today's educational video, we are going to go behind the scenes of the Wildlife Hospital and take a little sneak peek and see what's going on back there. The first thing we're going to check out is one of our busiest rooms, and that is the songbird room. And during this time of year, we have a ton of baby songbirds that require hand feedings very frequently, some of them every 30 minutes. And so in this video, you see Hillary, one of our wildlife rehabilitators, feeding a lot of the baby birds that are getting hand fed. And so the first ones we see are two really tiny little hummingbirds. And from there, we move on to one of the bigger cages of hummingbirds. And so in here we have some close to fledgling hummingbirds. A couple of them are still getting hand fed. You can see they're gaping, which is when they open their mouth wide to essentially ask for food. But there are a couple that you see flitting around that are pretty much independent now and are eating on their own. You see that little hummingbird feeder hanging in their cage as well. And that is what they're going to eat. The next little cage that Hillary goes to is a cage full of house finches. There are what looks like 5 house finches in there, as well as a barn swallow. And these house finches are very eager to eat. You can see that they immediately run to the front of the cage and are begging for food. So they're very good eaters, and they are getting a slurry in that syringe, and that slurry is essentially a blend of similar items that they would get in the wild as adults, but blended up to make it easier for them to eat while they're still developing. Once they reach a certain age, they're going to start transitioning over to solid food. And you might see in the bottom of this cage that there are a whole bunch of seeds all over the ground, and that's because they are starting that transition of moving from this slurry to solid food, and they're making quite a mess in the process. Next, Hillary feeds that barn swallow, and that barn swallow is to the phase where he is getting solid food now. So he is getting whole insects that have been dipped in water to help swallow that insect. And so before that point, he was getting that slurry, and now he has moved on to the solid food phase, which is an important stage of development, moving into that fledgling stage. He can't be released into the wild until we know confidently that he's eating on his own and he's eating solid food. After the birds transition from the hand feeding phase to the eating on their own phase, they are moved into our fledgling cage. And so that's where we see our rehabilitator Haley walking into next. She's walking into that fledgling cage where you can see there's tons of little birds flitting around, and they go here in order to ensure that they are definitely eating on their own and to strengthen their wings before we release them. So you can see that they flit around the cage, strengthening their wings. There are a couple birds in here that are getting supplemental hand feedings just to ensure they're getting the proper food that they need. And one of them is this bluebird. This bluebird is primarily eating on his own, but to ensure he's getting everything he needs, we are still hand feeding. But you're about to see in this video that he's not very hungry. He takes the food from Haley, but kind of just stands there. And that's because he is eating a lot on his own, and so he's not so hungry when we go to hand feed him, and that's great. This is a really good sign that he's moving up in his development, and so Haley will probably cut him off from that hand feeding pretty soon because of the fact that he's eating on his own. Moving away from our songbirds and over to our mammals, we do have a lot of young mammals in our care. A lot of them have been orphaned, some of them have been injured, and that is why we are taking care of them. In this video, you see our rehabilitator Hillary hand feeding a rock squirrel. This rock squirrel is at an age where it is not yet eating on its own, and so to ensure it's getting the proper food that it needs, we are still hand feeding from a syringe with a nipple on it. This is a huge reason why we always recommend when you find a baby wild animal to call us immediately. If that baby animal needs to be cared for, it's important that they are getting the proper diet. This rock squirrel is not eating solid food yet, and if we were to feed it solid food, it could hinder its development. So our rehabilitators are very careful and are very knowledgeable about when these animals need to be transitioned from hand-fed and from formula over to solid food in order to ensure that their proper development occurs. Speaking of squirrels, this next portion of this video is going to look in a tank that is holding some of our older spotted squirrels. And so these spotted squirrels have transitioned out of that hand feeding stage and are now eating on their own. So those are the dishes you see in there. These guys are very, very active, and that's great. They're strengthening their legs and preparing for release. So they're gonna be in here for a couple more weeks, getting stronger until they're moved to a larger enclosure, and then they will be released. They are getting fed a mix of some fruit, some vegetables, some nuts, and some pellets that are nutrient dense. And so you can see them going over to that dish and picking some food out and holding and nibbling on it. So our wildlife rehabilitators are confident that these guys are eating on their own and no longer need that hand feeding. that's all we have for you today in terms of our wildlife hospital. If you are interested in supporting our efforts and caring for all of these amazing creatures, please visit our website and learn how you can support us. Visit us next week for our next educational video. Thank you so much.